Hi, this is Carol Pope.
Hi, I'm Kevin Staples.
And you're listening to Rainbow Country
with Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
Today on Rainbow Country, award-winning artist, musician, producer, and remixer Barry Harris is my guest. That and more in episode 389, so stay tuned. The Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hello, my name is Conchita.
And I'm Barbecue.
And my name is Hardcora. And we are the Beat Girls.
You're listening to
Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT FM in Toronto and now proudly in syndication on 12 outlets across Canada from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast on Podomatic.com's Gay and Lesbian chart, as well as being recognized as Canada's #1 LGBT podcast on Feedspot.com. So today, he created the late 80s music group Concan. They went on to have the global hit, I Beg Your Pardon. Since the 1980s, he's gone on to be one half of the mega remixing and producing duo Thunderpuss, who's gone on to do work for the likes of Britney Spears, Madonna, and Whitney Houston, just to name 3 names that you'll probably recognize. He is award-winning artist Barry Harris. Plus in hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house, and on this episode I'm featuring some gay nightclub hits, a 3-song Concan set, and more. All that lies ahead as we start Journey 389 through Rainbow Country, and our first stop, the Rainbow Country School for Canadian Gay History. And on today's lesson from activist, historian, and author Tim McCaskill, Canada's Gay Pride History.
"1969 was a big year. It was the year that saw both the Stonewall riots in New York and, more or less, decriminalization of gay sex in Canada. The following year, the Americans celebrated the anniversary of Stonewall with Christopher Street Liberation Day. That was the summer of 1970. They didn't actually call it Pride at the time. August 1st, 71 was Toronto's first official gay picnic at Hanlon's Point. It was organized by the Community Homophile Association of Toronto and Toronto Gay Action. 300 people showed up. Now, that wasn't officially a pride, but Gerald Moldenhauer, one of the veterans of those days, maintains that a march down Yonge Street a few weeks later should be called the first Toronto Pride. That was a warm-up for the more famous We Demand demonstration in Ottawa held August 28th that year, a protest against the inadequacies of Trudeau's decriminalization. By the way, if you want to see some pictures of those early days, check out Gerald's website. It's geraldmoldenhauer.com, and it's spelled JERALDMOLDENHAUER. The first official Toronto Pride was actually the next year, 1972, again in August. Then there was a second Gay Pride Week, August 17th to 26th, 1973. That one was national, not just Toronto. There were events and marches in Vancouver, Saskatoon, Ottawa, Montreal, and Halifax. The focus was political, on ending discrimination against queers, something that was still quite legal across the country at the time. Then, the following year, 1974, there was Pride number 3 in Toronto, August 17th. I came out of that one, so I remember it very, very well. We marched over to Queen's Park to again demand human rights protection. And then they stopped. There was nothing in 75. People were focused on a national lesbian and gay conference in Ottawa. And again in 76, all of us in Toronto were busily preparing to host the 4th National Lesbian and Gay Conference, which happened in September. Gay Days was a big festival in 78, but nothing called itself Pride again until 1981 after the Bath Raids. That's where the misconception that Pride began after the Bath Raids comes from. 81, I suppose, is significant because that's when the shift happened from August to the last weekend in June to harmonize with prides across the US. But that's not the first Pride. So when you hear someone say that the first Toronto Pride was in 1981, you should politely point out that that's not quite true. Toronto and other cities in Canada had our own August Prides for almost a decade before that. And there are still those of us around who remember. This is Tim McCaskill, a gay liberation dinosaur from another planet and author of Queer Progress.
When I return, award-winning artist Barry Harris.
Hi, I'm Saida Garrett, co-writer of Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mr. Mark Tara.
Barry Harris. Hi, how are you?
Pretty good, thanks. How you doing?
I am well. I am well. I have to say thank you for being here, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, especially to talk about yourself, but also ConCan. This is your group, your project, going back to 1988. In 2024, you are hitting the road. Congrats on that. Your group ConCan had its first international hit in, I believe, 1988-89 with I Beg Your Pardon. You released 3 albums, Move to Move, 1989, Syntonic, 1990, Vida, 1993. Here we are in 2024, and you're hitting the road. Talk to me about going back on the road with ConCan and what prompted this. Let's start there.
Yeah, okay, well, you asked for it. It's a long story. Well, going back, you have to go back to 1988 when I was making I Beg Your Pardon and working at the record store. And the ConCan, how do I word this? ConCan was never a duo. ConCan was a project of mine.
You are ConCan.
Yes. And even then, when I did this and when I made it Beg Your Pardon, I went in with the idea of having an independent record at the time. I didn't even have the name ConCan. I didn't even have the name I Beg Your Pardon. I knew I wanted to do a song with having that smile for a while. I had in mind. So the record basically in 88 blew up, and Atlantic didn't really, from being an American point of view, they didn't really quite understand the fact that I had planned on it being a project, much like they do in the UK, much like a Fatboy Slim, much like an LCD Sound System, even at the time, something like that. KLF, who were big, had the Tammy Wynette, type song, type thing. That's all that I had really had in mind that Concan would be at the time. So I just continued on, and Atlantic, at first wanted to market us and say we were a duo, and I really had never intended to do that, and so the second album, I just continued on. I did a lot of the stuff. I did everything and all the writing and the producing, and with co-producing with other producers in LA on the first album. And the second album, I did it all by myself with Paul Robb Information Society and John Luwangu was a big producer and remixer, and at the time, and Martin Phillips in the UK. 93, it just came out. I just kept going. I wanted to do more of a band group thing then in 93. But in 93, I also have to go back to the times. Remember, the world is always changing and evolving. So when you look at things with today's perspective, everything looks different. But you have to remember the times and the era at the time. In 93, no one in the 80s, even Bon Jovi and any of these rock bands, maybe U2 kept going, but not very many. It was pretty much, you were done by 93 with the Soundgarden, the Nirvana, and the whole new era, moving in. So if you were like an 80s band, it was just, you were yesterday's news. And to keep going in 93 was pretty hard to keep going, though. I never really stopped with Concan. Well, I kind of did. I did off and on, and as you know, moved on with other musical ventures as well. But it was always still, Concan was still always there and a part of my life, and I never discarded Concan. It was not possible to do so because that song was so huge at the time. It was always a part of my life and a part of all my income throughout the years. And in 2014, I poked around with, it was like the 25-year anniversary at the time, and I poked, let's see if we can, see if there's any interest of going out there, on the road as Concan. And so I redid it, re-recorded it, went it down to my friend's Ian's in Toronto, re-recorded, and then I got all my friends to remix it in 2014 and put it out to the world and see what might happen. And not a lot really happened. But what happens since then is, of course, COVID, as you know, 2020 changed the world. And I've reissued now since the Vita album, third album, was only out in Canada. Remember at the time, also with the world, the way the world was in 80s and the 90s, if you didn't have a record deal or record label, you were done as an artist. You weren't just throwing stuff out very easily, independently. And even then, that was very independent. That was not a major label. Hypnotic Records was down in Toronto, and he was willing to give me a shot.
That was part of Star Sound, right?
Well, the original label, I beg your pardon, was at the time, but then it blew up and Star Sound. Yes, that was Revolving Records when you were saw the first label of, I beg your pardon, with the red sticker and the white label and stuff. But once it blew up in the States and stuff, they signed off on it and let me, go off into the world basically with it. They got paid off, and I moved forward. 1993. Now remember, by 1991, after touring in Brazil and stuff, Atlantic dropped Concan because it wasn't as big of, I beg your pardon, again. It was so hard to match that. So as an artist, when you're dropped, you're done. Unless you can willing to play wherever you can at the time. I was moving on to just other things. Or additional things musically. Well, I never stopped doing music, as you know. I'm pretty sure you're aware of. I never stopped doing music. But I stopped focusing on Concan and focusing on things like Out of Control and other of the Euro craze. And also, while I was doing house music at the barn on Wednesday nights, I was also making the Euro type sound as well. So I was going from one extreme musically to the other all over the place. So when you talk about how did this all come about, 2020 changed the world. And it was after 2020 when it was clear that everybody was going out again. Suddenly there was definitely this 80s resurgence thing. A lot of people were very fond. There's very fond memories of I Beg Your Pardon. So it's almost like, feels like to me like as generations, you've got your party years of in your teens and in your 20s. Now, these are most people. And then the average population, it seems like then they get married and they have kids in the next 20 years through their 30s and 40s. But even though it's at 20, 30 years, they're focusing on kids. Now, suddenly they're empty nesters and they're in their 50s and 60s, and they're all like, well, now what? So nostalgia is such a big thing because it reminds you when everybody, it makes you feel like it puts you right, it puts you right back in that place whenever you had no problems. Everything was careful. Your attitude was whatever. So that is, I'm not too sure if I'm even answering your questions or if I'm just rambling on, but I'm trying to tell you the whole condensed story of the journey of Concan from 88 to now.
So are you looking forward to being on the road in 2024?
Oh yeah. Oh yes, absolutely.
And can you give us some ideas where you'll be touring? Is this going to be obviously in Canada, but will it be in the States as well, in Europe? Can you give us some ideas?
No, I can't yet. I can't because there's T's to be crossed and I's to be dotted before.
Okay.
Go up when that time comes. Absolutely, I will be announcing it for sure.
So, answer me this question then: what can people expect when they come to see you and Concan? What kind of stage show are you going? Is it just going to be yourself? Is there a band behind you?
Oh yeah. There's a band and there's some sequencing along with it because that was also very difficult with a lot of the 80s and a lot of with Concan because it was very much a studio act and also the 80s was so very synth and so much programming and so many very different kinds of music. I'd have to do Concan 100% live. I'd have to have like a band of like 25 people, like string section and, so no, I've got a band. I've got, Kimberly, of course, who I adore and have, since when I first started working with her in 1995 and had her recover Sinful Wishes. She's always been in and out of my life, over the years. And the other guys, Christian, Tim, and Christian on bass, Tim on drums, and Adam on guitar. And also Christian is singing as well. So there's 5 of us this time around on this. And it's come together very naturally and organically and very good. And Kimberly and I just vocally, and as maybe you've seen some of the videos where we've done in the studio starting last year, doing a lot of little like rehearsals and little tests and fun things together, we just hit it off like just putting an old pair of shoes back on. It's just always felt great.
So Concan released 3 albums. I just mentioned them a little bit ago. Had a number of international singles like Puss in Boots, Harry Houdini. But let's talk about I Beg Your Pardon. Reached top 5 in several countries, including the UK, top 20 in the US. In 1990, Concan won a Juno Award for Best Dance Recording. So talk to me, because my understanding is this song came about essentially over weekends in Hamilton. Talk to me about the genesis of I Beg Your Pardon.
Well, I had always, the genesis of I Beg Your Pardon, I'd always wanted to make my own record since I was like 7. Part of the reason I started DJing is I thought that would also segue and lead me into the record industry, or at least remixing as well. And it didn't. So by 88, I had quit DJing and for a while, I've always been off and on. I'm all over the place on everything. I'm hot on something and cold on something, and I move in and out of stuff, different things, because call it the ADHD in me. And a record like I Beg Your Pardon, Concan is very ADH because there's so many different types of musical styles all over the place. But there's so many musical styles that I love that I can't just make a whole album of I Beg Your Pardons. I just can't. It just would bore me to tears. So starting when I was making I Beg Your Pardon, I went with it to, I met this guy, Tom, in Toronto in 87. And it wasn't until 88 when he moved back to back to Hamilton. And I had ventured out over into Portugal to learn Portuguese. Crazy me, thinking I was going to go DJ in the Mediterranean. And then there was a friend of mine, my best friend, Julie. Anyway, she told me about Tom. You should come back to Canada and work with Tom. He's got his own studio and he's blah, blah, blah. He's ready to be working. And so I decided, okay, yeah, I'd already met him early in the fall. So I decided, okay, I am going to make this record do or die. So I started part-time at the job, got a job part-time again at Star Sound. I'd been off and on with those guys. And they'd started putting out the record label. And I said, I've got a song idea. Would you be into putting my record out on your label? And they said, well, yeah, sure, why not? So I would go back and forth on weekends to Tom's studio, which was in his parents' basement out in the country of Hamilton, take the bus out there every weekend, stay over there overnight, and then get back to it the next morning. And little by little, I'd start with Give Me Your Biggest Drums, and then he'd be, okay, now what? And I knew what I wanted to do. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew in my head what I wanted. Mm-hmm. So little by little, it was taking shape. And then eventually I wrote the lyrics, which are about my first boyfriend. Figured, yes, they are. And, or the first crush of my life when I was 21, 5 years earlier. So I just wrote the lyrics thinking, okay, well, how did I feel at the time if I was to write the lyrics 5 years earlier? Well, I was 28. You know, at the time you don't think you're a baby, but we know now when you're 20s and 30s, you still are in many ways. So little by little, I came back and I'd play everybody the record that was coming. What do you think? And everyone's like, yeah. It's like, and I'd be playing it to different DJs, I think sometimes in the store to close friends as it was evolving. So by the time I had finished I Beg Your Pardon by going back and forth, and it came out on Revolving, we basically had the entire dance community of Toronto with us and on our side pushing it. And it just kind of stormed out of the gates rather hot immediately then. And then meantime, they had gotten distribution into the States. So it was at the same time getting into the States and leaking out. And it was people like WDRE out of New York area and Houston area. Those were the two main places, the two main alternative stations that were playing it as an import. And the reaction was just, little did I know. I did not know this was happening until about September, October. I remember the record came out probably around May or June of 88. Throughout the summer, it was just bubbling and, percolating everywhere and filtering everywhere. And mostly Houston and WDRE in the States was getting really, really good reaction. And it was starting to blow up then. So by November, we were being asked to come down to the States or come to Houston and perform. And also at that point, because it was being played on a major radio station in Houston, I got offers from about 5 or 6 different labels, from like Geffen and Capitol and Warner Brothers. And
wow,
just all these people suddenly were aware of a hit record that was happening. So it was a very exciting time. Like, oh my God, what have I done? Basically.
And the name Concan, not to be confused with CanCon, but Concan. Oh, is there a story behind this particular name?
A little bit, because I didn't know what I would call it. And yeah, there is a bit of a story behind that, actually, because there was many, many different things because I was making on the weekends, like, how do I make this record a hit record? And how do I, for example, for one of the first things when you'll notice when I first put out that record, the sticker is like this big on the 12-inch. I wanted to, when you walked in the record store and you looked around at a glance, you couldn't miss my record. That's why I've had Concan, and I beg your pardon. So at least people would go, wow, what's that? So that was one aspect of that. May Potts was working at CFNY around that time, and they were doing accepting submissions from indie bands. And I remember her talking and saying something about, well, we got all these submissions. If you want to make, some of these bands are sending them to us in this fun little and unique packaging and stuff to make us notice them and things like that. And so if you want to do submission, think of something unique in a way to grab our attention, to make it stand out from other people. So I thought, okay, well, Scritti Politti, Milli Vanilli, TikTok, and I thought, Con, what if turn it around, flip it, Can. And we even toy with the idea of putting those little German umlauts above the O. One of the guys at the record store did the artwork, and we toy with that idea because we wanted to look very kind of European because the grass is greener. And I knew it was a rather European type sounding record anyway. So we toyed with the idea of doing that. I thought, I think that may be pushing it too far. We're going to kind of into someone else's territory. We probably shouldn't go that far. So I just kept it at Concan. And then I thought to myself, well, people like CFNY, anyone in Canada, how can they can't get, I won't say the joke or the pun, or they won't, how can they not notice the similarities? So that was what I was thinking, that in Canada, I would be forced to be noticed. It's kind of, and then I thought, well, the rest of the world doesn't even really care. What difference does it make? Like I said, Milli Vanilli, Scritti Politti, TikTok, Flim Flam, Oingo Boingo, Concan, kind of like that. Who no one else would. Little did I know, the entire world, it's the number one question I always got. Where did you get the name Concan? I really didn't know anyone would even care.
Did you ever hear from the government of Canada?
No. Actually, it turned out that it's funny that I really didn't get very much recognition in Canada. It blew up bigger in the States, and then I got signed to Atlantic in the States, not Canada. So no one really other than the alternative stations like CFNY, would really touch me at the time until it came back out as a record through a major label in Atlantic Records. So the Little Method of My Madness didn't really work, but so what? Doesn't matter.
And on that note, we'll return right after this.
Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us, and of course our artists and the things that we do globally, and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
I'm Billy Newton Davis, and we're sitting here on Rainbow Country with the fabulous Mark Tara.
So Barry Harris, I believe you started out as a DJ back in the day in Toronto. You worked at the bar, and you worked at, was it Boots and Buds at the Selby Hotel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I worked almost everywhere.
You worked everywhere. Also Star Sound Records, a very popular record store at the time for music lovers and DJs. You mentioned this earlier. What got you into music originally? Were you always into music?
100%. Absolutely. Oh, yeah. All my life since I was like a kid, 5 and 6 and 7. Yeah, I drove my friends crazy. No, and I played in bands. I learned piano when I was 7 and guitar when I was like 10. And I was already kind of self-taught also in a lot of things, and played bass in bands in high school, though we never really got anywhere because we were just kids. So, oh yeah, absolutely. I've got older brothers and, sisters that were all into music. So music was always in our household. So 100% always been very extreme. I still am. I can't, it's in my DNA. Absolutely. Yeah.
So 1990, I think it's fair to say that would be an important year for you. You're working on your second Con-Can album, Syntonic, but you also met someone that year that would become very important for your music career, Chris Cox. Talk to me about how you and Chris Cox originally met, I believe in 1990.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That, we met in New York. He was in, that time it was the New Music Summit of 1990, and I was working in New York that summer working on Syntonic. And I remember I was at downtown. I wasn't far from there. We were working at David Morales' studio, Def Jam Studios at the time. And Mark, the A&R guy that discovered Con-Can the first place and signed me to Atlantic, he was one of the first people to discover Con-Can, and I beg your pardon, right from the beginning, which is why I signed to Atlantic, because all these other people, the other labels back in 89 came out of the work, and I thought, well, okay, yeah, maybe I almost went with another label, but then I thought, well, you know what? Mark is the first person to have discovered, I beg your pardon, and push it and champion it. So I stuck with Mark. So Mark has been a big part of my life, along with this whole Con-Can and now segueing into Thunderpuss journey, because Chris had approached Mark about a Puss in Boots edit that he had done, and Mark basically brought Chris into the studio to meet me because I was working at that the same time that Chris was in town, and Chris brought me a cassette of his edit of Puss in Boots, and that's when I met Chris. Now, and I knew he worked at Hot Tracks at the time, was an editor as well. So being a DJ, I was very aware of the DJ subscription services that he was doing edits and well, not remixes, but more re-edits at the time for Hot Tracks, which was a DJ service. So I had met Chris in 1990, and somewhere around 92 when I started writing 91, 92. I probably stopped in 91 because I was probably devastated that I'd gotten dropped. It was fall of 91 because I toured in Brazil in 91. So it wasn't till after that was over when Atlantic told me that they weren't going to move forward, and that was done. So around 91, 92, I probably stopped being devastated, curled up into a ball, and just kind of like, now what? But then I decided, okay, well, I'm not going to let some record. Wait a minute. How did this all start? I just started. I lost my way here. I'm not going to let a record company tell me when my career is over. I will tell me when a career is over. Wait a minute here. What because you kind of wake up from that journey of just what happened the past 2-3 years with a, major label, and toured in Singapore and Asia and Brazil. And suddenly to have it felt like I had I was like thrust up on this big giant pedestal, and then boom, fell hard down on my ass.
Right.
Suddenly it's over. So why I'm telling you all this is it was time now to program and work on new music and new songs. By 92, 93, I was going to start programming and doing my own stuff. I didn't need Tom in the studio like I did in 1988. Now I was getting you have to remember another reason why I Beg Your Pardon could be made, because it was the MIDI studio of the late 80s where people could go in and play everything and make their own record. So that's part of how that evolved. So by 92, 93, I could now, and I was learning how to program and work on my own stuff on my own at home, and syncing stuff up to like a reel-to-reel and computer and stuff. So this is how Chris and I became friends, is because Chris was always more technical than me. I'm very creative, and when I've got some ideas, I just want to get them down and write them and document them. And there were so many technical barriers still in the early 90s to get through. And I would always call Chris. I became friends by me calling him going, I can't get this computer to work with this thing, and I've got the new Mac and blah, 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 and this software, and what do I need? So he really guided me on all that and helped a lot with that stuff. And then eventually did some Concan mixes. And I'd also wanted to do a band thing at that time as well, because like I said, the times were evolving. We're now the 90s. So the whole 80s vibe and everything was yesterday's news. So I was like, okay, I have to change and evolve with the times. And that's basically how Chris and I became friends. So, and around 94, 95, and he had started a record label himself, and that's when I started working on some of the Euro-y stuff. Other than Concan stuff, I did some of the Euro-y stuff, and then they put it out on their label and Interhit. And then eventually, by 98, I was with their label because they had major distribution, which was a big thing then too. They had a hit Eurodance record and basically invited me to come down and work with them on Interhit Records. And we had these little visions of, we'll just be our own little PWL, Stock Aitken Waterman, at least get me and Jeff, which was his Interhit Records partner. And he was at Sunset and Gower. So he sponsored me, and I went down and I got my, a 5-year work visa and I moved to LA and stayed at his place at first and got set up. And Mark was still part of all this. Mark gave us both a lot of work. He was now at Universal Records. And at the beginning, he gave us a lot of work. And that was him who said, I want you to remix Kiss the Rain. And so we did. And that was not like a beg your pardon, but that was the big breakthrough that record is what really started the real Thunderpuss story. We had worked on stuff throughout 98. By summer of 98, we'd probably done Kiss the Rain for Mark or Spring of Mark, and DJs were playing that in New York. And then it wasn't until the fall of 98, because of the Billy Myers Kiss the Rain success, that Hosh then from Arista Records approached us and said he wanted to do something. He wanted something with some new fresh blood. And you guys are getting a lot of Billy Myers is really brilliant, blah, blah, blah. And he approached us, would you like to do a Whitney?
Yeah.
You asked for it. I'll give you an earful.
So obviously yourself and Chris are friends, and you're working together, and you come together and you form Thunderpuss 2000, and then Thunderpuss the name.
Yeah.
You guys ended up doing remixes and working with the likes of Madonna, with Jennifer Lopez, with Britney Spears, just to name just to name three, like hello.
Yeah.
Oh, do you have any favorite tracks or projects that you worked on that really stand out even today for yourself?
Well, there is, of course. Of course, I've got my faves. The Stranger in My House. I mean, all of them, all of them are. There's a couple I like more than others, and there's so many of them because when I made them at the time, they weren't done, or neither of us. I wouldn't say when I made them. When we made them, it was never done until we both felt that they were done. We just kept going until they were done. So over the test of time, I still love stand up. I've often said when people say my favorite, my favorite might be stand up, but I think our best work when everything, and then we brought Jody Denbroder into the mix to help because we were so overwhelmed and had 2 or 3 studios going at the time. And I just feel that we're just on fire, not literally, but I felt that Mary J. Blige was probably, I wouldn't say my favorite, was one that I'm most proud of, because I remember when I first heard that morning on MTV, and it's like, oh my God. And I came to the studio and I told Chris, oh my God, I just heard this great record. I really, really, really want to remix Mary J. Blige. And at that point, we were so on fire, we never asked to do anything. Everybody came to us because
really? Okay.
No, we never did. Now, luckily enough, Mark, as I said, worked at Universal. And so I called Mark. I said, oh my God, I just heard the new Mary J. Blige. Can you find out, see if I want to remix? We've got to do that. I was just so very emotional about that song. So he reached out to the powers that be and goes, yeah, if you want to remix it, they'll give it a shot, but you're going to have to get Mary's approval. It's like, well, at that point, we always had to get the artist approval. Everything
right.
had to go through them anyway. Say, okay, yeah, sure. I want to. So why I like that so much is we were at the peak of our creativity and musical powers, at that time. So when it breaks down, to the hip hoppy section, and Jody was helping with some of the drums and the percussion, like all three of us, and especially Chris and I were in just at the peak of our creativity and gelling and working chemistry. And that's why I'm most proud of that, because it's got 3 tempo changes is how I made it. Starts out at this, it goes down to that, and then somewhere in the middle and works itself back up. I wanted to make this just this big, beautiful, giant, epic thing at the time. And that's the one that I think I am most proud of, because it was also the most complicated. So, yeah.
Okay. So 1999, let's just talk about it. 1999, It's Not Right, But It's Okay.
Yes.
Whitney Houston.
Yes.
This song originally is a hip hoppy R&B mid-tempo slow type of track, and Thunderpuss remixes it, redoes it, I think, reproduce it. You guys take it to a whole new level. How did that come about? Like how does that work in your head in regards to taking something that is slower and speed that up without making it sound weird?
Oh, well, Whitney was easy because it was basically, we didn't have to speed it up or change it at all. It's just like, it was just that I recall. That's a loaded question when it comes to other records and songs. So that isn't one that we had to speed up much. That's one of the things that I did was make sure the vocals sounded as natural as possible, going from the original version to a dance by chopping up the vocals with some of the original acapellas mixed in with the speeded up versions to make the long story short. That's one of the things that I enjoyed doing as part of Chris and I's Who Does What in a Mix. And we would bounce back and forth to different things. Sometimes I would write music, he'd do the new music, or he'd start the lead with a groove. There's just very many different ways that we'd work. So with Whitney, I had the dun 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 bump 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 bump. Well, there's a great example of the chemistry of two people working together. Well, then he changed that to that log drum. Dum, 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 dum. So he made it sound a little fresher and cooler and very recognizable, independent, separate hook. So there's these little chemistry things of us going back and forth with ideas being created back and forth. And the best thing about what Chris and I were doing is where the other, what was the times, and it was the chemistry, it was the relationship. It was just, everything was just gelling and we're in a groove. And I've always thought, even then, areas where I was weak, he was strong. Where the areas that he might have been kind of weak, I was strong. So between the two of us, you've got this boof, boom, solid, right into the groove, into the pocket type chemistry partnership working.
And that song, I believe, is a #1 Billboard club hit. How were you surprised at the success of that track for you?
I am surprised to this day of how the longevity of. I mean, remember when it came out, everyone was like, "Oh, it's so magical, it's so great." I'm like, I was thinking, well, yeah, it's good, and it's Whitney, and she's a brilliant singer, and we love her, and make fool of me, yeah, she can pull that off live, even though it was very studio trickery. But another thing that Chris did that I could never have extended that note because of his technical skills with editing that. It's at the time I was like, oh, I like it. I like it. It's great. Yes, of course, I'm proud of it. But we'd already done a whole bunch of mixes throughout the year at that time. Then we kept going on. We kept mixing, and things like Amber Sexual that went top 40 as well at the time. And I was like, I don't know. It was just suddenly it was like, I beg your pardon, it was chemistry. It's like used to call like the musical gods are shining down on you and the stars are aligning. You just don't know. You just keep doing what you're doing, and you don't know certain things, because in the Concan years in the 90s, I was like, oh, this is going to be so big. This is going to be so big. This is going to be so big. And it just was not. So I got to the point where I'm not going to even say this is going to be so big anymore, because I just I don't know anymore. So yes, the hugeness of Whitney, yes, that took me by surprise, but you never really know. I remember when Hosh came back to us, and My Love Is Your Love was going to be the next single after Heartbreak Hotel. And I thought, I want to say that it was Spain that came back to them and said the remix of It's Not Right, But It's Okay is getting really strong reaction. And the States basically had to put It's Not Right, But It's Okay out as the next single for radio that they weren't expecting to do. So I think it took them by surprise as well.
Well done to you. Well done to you guys.
Oh yes, because I mean, it's just like Concan. It's like, I call it like you're being handed the ball of success. So you get handed with that ball of success, you run, and you just keep running as fast and as hard as you can until it's done, or it's finished, or you're just so exhausted you just fall. So I felt that I was very fortunate to have the ball of success handed to me yet again. So this time I was going to make sure that I was not going to be, it lasted longer. I was going to make sure it lasted a lot longer this time around. And I kept running for the next 7 years until the time started changing, and it was just exhausting at that point. And, as any relationships, things start to change and evolve and, crumble and things like that, until it's eventually, okay, we had a great run. Yeah.
You had a great run, but in 2022, you guys ended up doing another Thunderpuss remix for a Whitney Houston track, "Don't Cry for Me." I have a random question for you, and this is going to sound really odd to ask, but I'm asking it with all sincerity and respect. But do you enjoy head?
What?
Do you enjoy head?
I'm not answering that question.
Barry Harris, I'm talking about your number one Billboard Club dance hit, "Welcome to My Head."
Oh, no, you
with fellow
rascally
Canadian and Torontonian Mika Barnes. You guys had
right
an underground #1 hit with "Welcome to My Head." Congrats on that.
Yes, thank you. Well, wait a minute. You were starting. You flashed back to 2023 and asked me that question. You didn't ask me that threw me off. I thought we were suddenly into that last year. That was back in 2003.
That was 2003. Yeah.
Or 02. I can't remember. Somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because at that time I wanted to. We were so on fire on such a roll at that time. I wanted to. I didn't want to sign it to a record label, and I just kind of promoted it myself as an indie white label thing, and to see if we could get it #1 on the Billboard chart, and we did. It was work, but anyway, yeah, I'm proud of that record too. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about not necessarily like knowing what's going to be a hit, or trying to stay away from that. In 2023, I believe you released and redid some of your Concan tracks, Sinful Wishes being one of them, that was on originally 1993's Vida. Is that one of the tracks that you thought when it originally came out in 93 that this one's going to hit?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. No, I reissued.
It's a great track.
I put that out. Well, thank you. No, in 1993, when that came out, it's funny. More of the dance mix is the one that became a hit because I was working at the record store again because I'd been in and out and off that. And I mean, even after with the Concan success, I felt it was very important to stay close to the street to keep make sure what's going on in the real world, because it's so easy to get into this pop world and get carried away. But to be back on street level again and in touch with what's going on in the clubs. So it's funny, Sinful Wishes, and then I remixed it. I did that at home, remixed it, put it out, and the dance mix was actually more of a legit hit. And I was watching that be a real legit hit as well. So it always felt, like I said in another interview, like the one that got away. I always knew there was something about that song. It was used the same sound as I Beg Your Pardon. And there was just something about that song that I've always really, really, really liked. So I re-put out all those remixes in 2020. I reissued the Concan stuff, but because that was only out in Canada. So the rest of the world never got the chance they only knew it was a myth of some released album, right? But now we're 20, 30 years later and it's the digital era, I can put it out, and I put all these other remixes by these other Toronto remixers, and Dino and Terry are on there. It was so nice to reissue all that stuff and put it out to the world, and I don't know, just have it available to, like, I mean, a lot of the Concan fans that are rediscovering Concan, and I Beg Your Pardon, that have fond memories of that. And there's more additional music, out there. So as of 2020, put that back out. And that's when I decided to, I knew at the time when we were doing the live version that we were recording it, that I would eventually later get back to it and mix it properly and put it out, which wasn't until this past summer where I did that. Yeah. Yeah, because I've always loved that song. And it was nice to do an entirely different variation of it as well.
So Barry Harris, here's my last question for you. You are a multi-award-winning artist. You're part of the LGBT community. You have this history, this legacy of music, of producing, of remixing, of being a singer-songwriter. What do you hope audiences come away with when they hear one of your tracks, when they see you live, when they turn on the radio and they hear, one of the artists that you've done a remix for? What do you hope your audience comes away with after they've experienced Barry Harris?
Feeling happy, warm, and fuzzy, good times, just happiness. There's just so much negativity out there, and there's I don't know. I just feel good. Just feel good music, is basically what I'm from some of the stuff that I've seen with I Beg Your Pardon being on out there on TikTok, which by the way, I don't know if do you know how viral that went in the past 5 weeks?
No, do tell.
In it, I threw out a live week because we did a live band version and in the summertime of us all getting together and recording us on stage. Mm-hmm. And I did a snippet of it, put it out on TikTok, and it's now at 445,000 views in 5 weeks. It blew up, and it's so nice when you say, "What do you want people?" I'm reading all the comments, and there's nothing but every comment is a great comment. They're all like, "Oh, I love this song. It reminds me that I knew this song. I never knew who did it, and now I'm so happy to hear this song again and rediscovering it." And it just, this brings me back to my youth and like, just so many good comments and happy comments and of happiness. It's just, that's all I really want. I'm just, I'm tired of like the 80s and 90s attitude of being so cool and just being all dark and snobby. It's like, I don't want, no. But I beg your pardon, always was. It came out, do you want to hustle? Do you want to sell? It was always a little bit of tongue-in-cheek goofiness as well, just to have fun, just have a good time. And I really do mean that. It's come along and share the good times while we can. Like, really. You know what? Don't take life too seriously. There's too much tragedy all around us every day as it is. Just escapism. We need escapism, and why not have some feel-good escapism? That's it. There's the answer.
Well said. Well said. Barry Harris, well said, well done, well recorded, well produced. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Mark. It's nice to chat with you again.
Barry Harris and Concan are on tour in 2024. If you'd like to find out more, especially where they might be playing in your area, check them out on Facebook. Simply search Concan.
The phone rings. I got a message from the mayor. He's going to call me back the next day. I get the call, and he said, if you'd accept, we'd like to honor you with the key to the city. There was an event later that year in May. Just a key, right? Like, key to what? A decent job, a good singing career. It's really a metaphor, but it's history. So a reporter wants to talk to me and says, so it's a key, right? Like, what's the big deal? I said, well, not everybody gets the key. So I looked it up, and I guess it is kind of a big deal.
The date, May 17th, 2018, when trans activist Susan Gapka made history by becoming the first trans woman to be presented with the key to the city of Toronto. By the way, past recipients include Rush and the Raptors. And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, simply head over to marktara.com, where everything is connected, and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, check out my socials at Mark Tara. The podcast is available on all major platforms. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, we are living in days of making dreams come true, so believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, I'm Paul Poirier, Canadian champion in ice dance and 3-time Olympian, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.